The sun was barely peeking through the clouds as a woman in her early 40s walked through the sliding doors of San Francisco International Airport. She could have easily been mistaken for any other traveler that morning, wearing comfortable blue jeans, a soft cream sweater, and carrying a well-worn leather backpack. But appearances can be deceiving. This was Aria Thompson, the brilliant mind behind Phoenix Airlines and one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs of her generation. With a net worth of $4.2 billion, she could have been flying in her private jet. Instead, here she was, deliberately choosing to experience her airline just like any other passenger would. As she made her way through the terminal, Aria couldn't help but smile at the massive Phoenix Airlines billboard overhead. The one with the tagline "Soar with us" that she had personally approved last month. Nobody around her gave her a second glance. That's exactly how she liked it. Despite owning one of the fastest-growing airlines in the country, Aria had always kept a low profile, rarely appearing in public and letting her work speak for itself. Stopping at a small coffee shop, she ordered her usual, plain black coffee, no sugar. The young barista chatted away about the morning rush while making her drink, completely unaware that the woman in front of him could buy the entire airport if she wanted to. Aria listened kindly, leaving a generous tip before heading to her gate. At the first-class check-in counter, she presented her ticket and ID. The ground staff member, a friendly older gentleman named Ray, processed her boarding pass efficiently. "Have a pleasant flight, Miss Thompson," he said with a warm smile, treating her just like any other premium passenger. This was exactly why she loved flying incognito, to experience the genuine, unfiltered version of her airline service. Walking through the priority security lane, Aria observed everything with keen interest. She noticed how the security staff handled passengers' belongings, how clearly they communicated instructions, and the overall flow of the process. Every detail mattered to her. She'd built Phoenix Airlines from scratch, turning it from a small regional carrier into a major player in the industry through attention to exactly these kinds of details. As she settled into the first-class lounge, Aria pulled out her laptop to check some emails. Around her, business executives in expensive suits talked loudly on their phones, while a couple of celebrities tried to remain inconspicuous behind designer sunglasses. Nobody suspected that the casually dressed black woman sitting quietly in the corner owned not just their upcoming flight, but the entire airline. Looking at her watch, Aria realized it was almost time to board Flight PX 447 to New York. She gathered her things, tucking away her laptop into her backpack. Through the large windows, she could see her plane being prepared for departure, the distinctive Phoenix logo on the tail catching the morning light. It was going to be a full flight today, and she was curious to experience the service from a passenger's perspective. Little did she know that this routine flight would turn into one of the most challenging and enlightening experiences of her career. As she walked toward the gate, Aria had no idea that in the next few hours she would witness firsthand the kind of discrimination she had always fought against in the corporate world. But more importantly, she would have the opportunity to turn an unfortunate incident into a moment of real change. The gate agent scanned her boarding pass, and with a polite welcome aboard, Aria stepped onto the jet bridge. She took a deep breath, enjoying these final moments of anonymity. The familiar smell of the aircraft and the sound of the auxiliary power unit humming in the background made her smile. This was her airline, her dream turned reality, and she was about to experience it just like any other passenger would, for better or worse. As Aria made her way down the aisle to her first-class seat, she couldn't help but notice the supple shift in atmosphere. A flight attendant named Diana Winters stood near the front, greeting passengers with practiced smiles that somehow didn't quite reach her eyes. When Aria approached, that smile flickered noticeably. "Your boarding pass, please," Diana said, her tone distinctly cooler than it had been with the previous passengers. Aria handed it over, maintaining her usual calm demeanor. Diana studied the ticket with exaggerated scrutiny, glancing between the paper and Aria's face multiple times. "Is there a problem?" Aria asked softly, aware of the growing line of passengers behind her. "Well," Diana replied, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "this is the first-class cabin. Are you sure you're in the right section?" Her emphasis on first class made several passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Aria pointed to her seat number on the boarding pass. Yes, I'm quite sure. Seat 2A. Diana's lips tightened into a thin line as she handed back the boarding pass. Very well, she said, making it sound like she was doing Aria a huge favor. Though you might feel more comfortable in another section. An elderly gentleman in 1C looked up from his newspaper, frowning at Diana's tone. A young woman across the aisle had already pulled out her phone, discreetly recording the interaction. As Aria stored her backpack in the overhead compartment, Diana hovered nearby, watching her every move. When Aria took out her laptop before sitting down, Diana immediately stepped forward. "Ma'am, are you sure that's your bag?" she asked sharply. "I noticed you looking at several overhead bins before choosing this one." Aria had simply been checking for available space, as any passenger might do. "Yes, it's my bag," she replied patiently. "Would you like to check the luggage tag?" By now, other first-class passengers were being served pre-flight champagne. Diana had seemingly forgotten about this service, too focused on monitoring Aria's every movement. A younger flight attendant noticed the oversight and quickly began offering drinks to everyone, including Aria, who politely accepted. This seemed to irritate Diana even more. Throughout the boarding process, she made several unnecessary passes by Aria's seat, each time finding something to comment on. "Your bag isn't quite straight under the seat, or the laptop needs to be stowed during boarding," even though other passengers still had their devices out. When Aria requested a glass of water, Diana's response was telling. "We're quite busy with boarding right now," she said, despite just having served another passenger in the same row. "Perhaps you could wait until we're in the air. Unless you'd prefer to try economy class, the service might be more what you're used to." The businessman across the aisle nearly choked on his champagne at this comment. More phones had come out, recording discreetly. The tension in the first-class cabin was palpable, with other passengers exchanging uncomfortable glances. Aria remained composed, though her heart was racing. In all her years of flying, even before she owned an airline, she'd never experienced such blatant discrimination. As the owner of Phoenix Airlines, she could have immediately called for Diana's removal from the flight. But that wasn't her style. She believed in understanding situations fully before taking action. Instead, she pulled out her phone and began taking notes, documenting every interaction. If this was how Diana treated her, a first-class passenger, Aria couldn't help but wonder about other travelers' experiences. This flight was turning into an unexpected opportunity to experience firsthand the kind of service issues she'd always hoped her airline would never have. Little did Diana know that her actions were about to trigger a major transformation in airline service standards, not just for Phoenix Airlines, but for the entire industry. But first, things would have to get worse before they could get better, and the real drama was just about to unfold. The flight had been in the air for about 30 minutes when things started to escalate. Aria was quietly working on her laptop, reviewing some company documents, when Diana's shadow fell across her screen once again. "Ma'am, I need to check your ticket one more time," Diana announced loudly, causing several passengers to look up from their own activities. "We've had some issues with seat assignments lately." Aria took a deep breath. "You've already checked my ticket 3 times," she replied calmly. "Is there a specific concern I can help address?" A kind-looking grandmother in the window seat next to Aria spoke up. "I've been flying first class for 20 years, dear, and I've never seen anyone's ticket checked this many times after takeoff." Diana's face flushed red, but she pressed on. "It's just standard procedure," she insisted, though everyone knew it wasn't. More phones had appeared, recording the interaction. The videos from earlier were already spreading across social media, though nobody on the plane knew that yet. Just then, Aria's phone buzzed with an urgent email about a potential partnership deal. As she reached up to get her reading glasses from her bag in the overhead compartment, Diana practically leaped forward. "Step away from that compartment immediately," Diana demanded, her voice sharp enough to make other passengers jump. "You can't just go through other people's belongings." The elderly businessman from 1C stood up. "That's her bag. We all saw her put it there during boarding. This is getting ridiculous." Diana turned to him, her professional mask slipping further. "Sir, please stay out of this. I'm handling a security situation." The only situation here is your behavior, called out a young woman from across the aisle, no longer bothering to hide her phone as she recorded. Aria remained standing, her hand still on her bag. Diana, she said quietly, using the flight attendant's name for the first time, I understand you're concerned about security. Would you like me to show you my ID again? Or perhaps we could speak with the lead flight attendant. The mention of the lead flight attendant seemed to touch a nerve. Diana's face contorted with anger. You don't make demands here. I've had enough of your attitude. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Aria began to remove her bag from the overhead bin, Diana reached out and forcefully grabbed her wrist. Startled, Aria pulled back instinctively, causing her bag to drop. And then, in a moment that would soon be replayed millions of times on social media, Diana slapped Aria across the face. The sound echoed through the cabin. Passengers gasped. Someone screamed. The grandmother next to Aria stood up so quickly she knocked over her drink. The young woman across the aisle shouted, "Oh my God." For a moment, everything froze. Aria stood perfectly still, her hand touching her cheek where Diana had struck her. The air felt electric with tension. Diana herself seemed shocked by what she'd done, her hands still raised, her eyes wide with the realization of her actions. The lead flight attendant, Anthony, who had been in the economy section, came running at the sound of the commotion. He took one look at the scene and his face went pale. Unlike Diana, Anthony had been with the airline for over a decade. He had attended every executive briefing. He knew exactly who Aria Thompson was. "Miss Thompson," he gasped, horror evident in his voice. I'm so deeply sorry. Are you all right?" The use of her name and Anthony's evident recognition caused a ripple of whispers through the cabin. Diana's face, already flushed with anger, drained of all color as the reality of the situation began to dawn on her. "Did he just say Thompson?" someone whispered. "As in Aria Thompson, the owner of Phoenix Airlines?" Diana took a stumbling step backward, her hand flying to her mouth. "Owner?" she squeaked, barely audible. Aria finally spoke, her voice steady despite the red mark blooming on her cheek. "Anthony, please ensure all witness statements are collected and contact ground operations to have police meet us at the gate." She turned to face Diana directly. "You should go prepare your incident report. I have a feeling we'll have a lot to discuss when we land." The other passengers burst into applause, but Aria raised her hand for quiet. "Please," she said, addressing everyone in the cabin, "let's not make this situation any more difficult than it needs to be. What happened here today isn't about revenge or punishment, it's about learning and making changes where they're clearly needed." As Anthony escorted a now trembling Diana to the crew area, Aria sat back down, pulled out her phone, and began typing rapidly. The grandmother beside her offered a glass of water and a kind smile. "You're handling this with amazing grace," she said softly. Aria looked up and gave a small smile. "Sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best opportunities for change," she replied. "And believe me, changes are coming." The next 2 hours of the flight felt like an eternity. Word had spread throughout the plane about what happened in first class and about who Aria really was. Flight attendants from economy class kept finding excuses to peek into the first-class cabin, their eyes wide with curiosity and disbelief. Diana had been confined to the crew rest area, where she sat pale and shaking, writing her incident report. Anthony, the lead flight attendant, had taken over her duties while simultaneously trying to manage the growing social media crisis. Videos of the confrontation were already going viral, with hashtags like #PhoenixAirlineslap and #FlyingWhileBillionaire trending on multiple platforms. Meanwhile, Aria sat quietly in her seat, ice pack pressed against her cheek as she typed rapid-fire messages on her phone. The grandmother next to her, who had introduced herself as Rose, had become something of a protective figure, shooing away curious passengers who tried to take photos or ask questions. "You know," Rose said softly, "in my 72 years, I've seen a lot of discrimination, but I've never seen someone handle it with such dignity." Aria looked up from her phone and smiled. "I learned early in life that responding to hate with more hate only creates a bigger fire. Sometimes the best response is to let people's actions speak for themselves." The businessman from 1C, who they'd learned was named Peter, leaned over. Still, you're pressing charges, right? That assault was completely unacceptable. Before Aria could respond, Anthony returned with an update. Ms. Thompson, I've spoken with ground operations. Police will meet us at the gate, and company executives are already waiting at the terminal. Would you like us to arrange private transportation from the airport? No need, Aria replied, her voice firm but kind. I'll be staying to handle this personally. She turned back to Peter. And to answer your question, no, I won't be pressing charges. A murmur of surprise rippled through the first-class cabin. The young woman who had been recording everything looked up from her phone. But why not? The videos have millions of views already. People are demanding she be fired. Aria sat up straighter, wincing slightly at the movement. Tell me, she said, addressing everyone in the cabin, what would pressing charges accomplish? One person loses their job, gets publicly shamed, and probably becomes more bitter and prejudiced than before. Meanwhile, thousands of other people with similar biases continue working in customer service positions across the country. She paused, looking around at the attentive faces. No, I have something different in mind. This incident has shown me that we need systemic change, not just punishment. Every dark cloud has a silver lining, and maybe this is our opportunity to make real improvements in how airlines handle diversity and customer service training. Anthony, who had been listening intently, cleared his throat. Ms. Thompson, the incident report is ready for your review. And Diana would like to speak with you, if you're willing. The captain fell silent, all eyes turning to Aria. She took a moment to consider, then nodded. Yes, I'll speak with her. But first, I need to make a few calls. As Aria stood up, her phone buzzed with a message from her executive team. They had drafted a press statement condemning the incident and announcing Diana's immediate termination. Aria quickly typed back, Hold all statements. I have a different approach in mind. Walking toward the crew area, Aria felt the eyes of every passenger on her. She had built Phoenix Airlines from the ground up, turning it into a major carrier through hard work and dedication. Now, this unfortunate incident might just give her the platform to create even bigger changes in the industry. Diana looked up as Aria entered the crew area, tears streaming down her face. The flight attendant opened her mouth to speak, but Aria raised her hand gently. Before you say anything, Aria said quietly, I want you to know that what happens next is entirely up to you. We can handle this the easy way. You lose your job, I press charges, and we both walk away bitter. Or we can try something different, something that might actually make a difference. Diana wiped her eyes, looking confused but hopeful. What do you mean? I mean, Aria replied, pulling up a chair, that sometimes the best way to fight prejudice is not through punishment, but through understanding and education. So, I have a proposition for you. The plane continued its journey across the country, carrying not just passengers, but also the potential for real change in how airlines approach diversity and customer service. The story that had started with a slap was about to transform into something much more meaningful, but only if both women were willing to take the first step toward understanding. As the plane began its descent into New York, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. News crews were already gathering at the terminal, alerted by the viral videos that had spread across social media like wildfire. In the crew area, Aria sat with Diana, both women deep in conversation. Diana's voice cracked. I never thought about how many little things I did that showed my prejudice. The extra ticket checks, the comments about economy class, the way I watched you with the overhead bin. It all seems so obvious now. Aria nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly why I'm not interested in punishment. These behaviors often run so deep that we don't even notice them until someone holds up a mirror. The plane touched down smoothly, and Anthony knocked gently on the crew area door. Ms. Thompson, we've landed. There are quite a few reporters at the gate. Through the small window, they could see camera flashes already going off as passengers from other flights recognized the Phoenix Airlines plane and started taking pictures. The story had exploded online during their flight, with news channels picking up the viral videos and running segments about the incident. Diana, Aria said, turning to face the flight attendant, you have a choice to make right now. The easy path would be to slip out through the back, avoid the cameras, and let your resignation letter do the talking. but I'm offering you a different option. Diana looked up, her eyes red but clear. The training program you mentioned. Yes, it won't be easy. You'll need to face your biases head-on, work with diversity consultants, help develop new training protocols. Your story, our story, could help change how airlines approach these issues, but only if you're willing to do the hard work. Before Diana could respond, Aria's phone buzzed with messages from her executive team. They were getting pressured by shareholders to take immediate action. The company's stock had dropped 3 points since the videos went viral. The elderly businessman, Peter, poked his head into the crew area. Sorry to interrupt, but the other passengers wanted you to know. We've all given statements to the company. Every one of us is willing to testify about what we saw. Thank you. Aria replied, but I don't think that will be necessary. She turned back to Diana. What's your decision? Diana took a deep breath. I want to make this right, not just for you, but for everyone I might have treated unfairly without even realizing it. I'll do whatever it takes. Aria smiled and pulled out her phone. Anthony, please ask all passengers to remain seated for a moment after we reach the gate. Diana and I have an announcement to make. As the plane taxied to the gate, Aria quickly drafted a message to her PR team. Instead of the standard corporate response they prepared, she outlined something completely different. This wouldn't be just another company trying to sweep discrimination under the rug with a generic apology. The plane came to a stop, and camera flashes immediately lit up the terminal windows. Aria stood at the front of the first-class cabin, Diana beside her, as passengers quieted down to listen. Today, something unfortunate happened on this flight, Aria began, her voice clear and strong. But what matters isn't just what happened, it's what we do about it. Right now, I'm announcing the creation of the Phoenix Initiative, a comprehensive program to address unconscious bias in the airline industry. She gestured to Diana, who stepped forward nervously. Diana has agreed to work with us in developing this program, sharing her experiences, and helping create new training protocols that will be made available to every airline that wants them. Because this isn't just about Phoenix Airlines, it's about making air travel more inclusive and respectful for everyone. The cabin erupted in applause. Rose, the grandmother, wiped tears from her eyes. The young woman who had recorded everything was already posting the announcement on social media, where it would soon go viral for a very different reason. As the passengers began to deplane, many stopped to shake both women's hands. Rose hugged them both, whispering, "This is how real change happens, one brave conversation at a time." Outside, reporters were clamoring for statements, but Aria and Diana bypassed them, heading straight for the conference room where the executive team waited. They had work to do. The incident that could have ended in anger and lawsuits was instead becoming the catalyst for industry-wide change. Anthony watched them go, then turned to his crew. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've been flying for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. Maybe sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air." The videos were still circulating online, but now with a different message. What had started as a shocking example of discrimination was transforming into a story of redemption, growth, and positive change. In the coming weeks, other airlines would reach out to join the Phoenix Initiative, and Diana's journey from that moment of prejudice to becoming an advocate for change would inspire thousands. 3 weeks after the incident, Phoenix Airlines' main training center was buzzing with activity. The large conference room had been transformed into a workshop space, with Diana standing at the front, sharing her story with a group of flight attendants from various airlines. "I thought I was one of the good ones," she explained, her voice steady but humble. "I never considered myself prejudiced. But watching those videos of myself, it was like seeing a stranger. The way I acted, the things I said. I didn't recognize that person." The room was packed. Airlines from across the country had sent representatives to learn about the Phoenix Initiative. Even competitors had put aside their differences to be part of this groundbreaking program. In her office upstairs, Aria was reviewing the latest social media statistics with her team. The hashtag Phoenix Initiative had taken on a life of its own, with people sharing their own experiences of discrimination in customer service. What had started as a PR nightmare had transformed into a movement. "Look at these numbers," had a social media manager said excitedly. "Our training videos have been viewed over 2 million times." Other companies are reaching out, asking if they can adapt the program for their industries. Hotels, restaurants, retail chains, they all want to be part of this. Aria smiled, touching her cheek where the slap had left a mark that had long since faded. Sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best opportunities for change, she said, echoing her words from that day on the plane. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Rose, the grandmother from the flight, who had become an unexpected advisor to the initiative. After retiring from her role as a civil rights attorney, she had volunteered to help develop the legal framework for the training program. "You need to see this," Rose said, holding up her tablet. She played a video of Diana speaking at a national conference on corporate responsibility. The flight attendant, who had once let her prejudices control her actions, was now teaching others about recognizing and overcoming their own biases. "It's amazing," Rose commented, "how people can change when you give them the chance." Down in the training room, Diana was showing clips from that fateful flight. The room fell silent as they watched the confrontation unfold. Several attendees wiped away tears when they saw the slap. "That moment changed my life," Diana continued, "but not in the way you might think. Ms. Thompson could have pressed charges. I could have lost my job, been publicly shamed, maybe even faced jail time. Instead, she saw an opportunity for real change." The door opened quietly, and Aria slipped into the back of the room. Diana smiled when she saw her, gaining confidence as she continued. "The Phoenix Initiative isn't just about avoiding bad behavior. It's about understanding why we act the way we do, recognizing our unconscious biases, and actively working to be better. It's about creating an environment where every passenger feels welcome and respected, regardless of who they are." One of the attendees raised their hand. "But how do you deal with the shame? The knowledge that you acted so wrongly?" Diana nodded thoughtfully. "The shame is part of the journey, but it's what you do with that shame that matters. You can let it destroy you, or you can let it transform you." After the session, Aria approached Diana. "That was powerful," she said. "How are you feeling about next week's national rollout?" "Nervous," Diana admitted, "but ready. The media interviews are getting easier, and the support from other flight attendants has been overwhelming. So many of them have reached out to share their own stories of times they let bias affect their behavior." They walked together to the break room, where crews from different airlines were mingling, sharing experiences and strategies. The walls were covered with posters promoting the initiative's core message: change takes flight. "You know," Diana said softly, "when you first offered me this chance, I thought it was just about saving my job. But it's become so much more than that. We're actually making a difference." Aria watched as a group of new trainees practiced scenarios, learning to recognize and correct their unconscious biases. The program had evolved far beyond anything she had initially imagined. "The best part," she replied, "is that it's just the beginning. Every person who goes through this training becomes a catalyst for change in their own right. It's like dropping a pebble in a pond. The ripples keep spreading." A notification popped up on both their phones. Another airline had just signed up to join the initiative. This one was from Europe, marking the program's first international expansion. "From one terrible moment on a plane," Diana mused, "to a worldwide movement for change. Who would have thought?" Aria smiled. "Sometimes the worst turbulence leads to the smoothest flight path. We just have to be brave enough to stay the course." Outside the training center, a new group of flight attendants was arriving for the afternoon session. Each one would leave with tools and insights that would help shape the future of air travel. The incident that could have ended careers had instead launched a revolution in customer service: one person, one flight, one change at a time. 1 year after the infamous slap that changed the airline industry, Aria stood at the podium of the National Aviation Conference, looking out at a sea of faces. The room was filled with airline executives, flight attendants, and industry leaders from around the world. "When I boarded that flight a year ago," she began, "I never imagined it would lead us here. Today, the Phoenix Initiative has trained over 50,000 airline staff members. But more importantly, it has changed how we think about customer service and human dignity." In the front row, Diana sat next to Rose, both women beaming with pride. The past year had transformed them all in unexpected ways. Diana had become a leading voice in corporate diversity training, while Rose had come out of retirement to serve as the initiative's chief legal advisor. The numbers tell an incredible story, Aria continued, clicking to the next slide. Passenger complaints about discrimination have dropped by 65% across participating airlines. Employee satisfaction rates have increased by 40%. But the real success isn't in the statistics, it's in the stories. She gestured to the screen behind her, where videos began to play. A flight attendant sharing how the training helped her recognize her own biases. A passenger describing how different the flying experience felt. An airline CEO admitting that he had learned things about his own prejudices that he never realized he carried. But perhaps the most powerful story, Aria said, looking at Diana, is one of transformation. Would you like to share your perspective? Diana walked to the podium, her steps confident, so different from the shaking, fearful woman she'd been a year ago. The audience applauded warmly, many having heard her story through the training videos. A year ago, I was the villain in a viral video, Diana began, her voice clear and strong. I was that flight attendant, the one who let her prejudices lead to an assault on a passenger who turned out to be the airline's owner. I could have lost everything that day. Instead, I gained a whole new perspective on life. The room was silent, everyone leaning forward to listen. Even the usually restless photographers had stopped clicking their cameras. The Phoenix Initiative isn't just about avoiding bad behavior, Diana continued. It's about understanding why we act the way we do. It's about recognizing that change is possible if we're willing to do the hard work. And trust me, it is hard work. Peter, the businessman from the original flight, stood up from his seat in the audience. I was there that day, he said, and I'd flown hundreds of times since then. The difference in how airline staff interact with passengers now is like night and day. From the back of the room, Anthony, now the head of training at Phoenix Airlines, added, the best part is how the program keeps evolving. Every new person who goes through it brings fresh perspectives and insights. Rose took the podium next, adjusting her glasses with a grandmother's familiar gesture. As someone who lived through the civil rights era, she said, I never thought I'd see the day when corporations would take such meaningful steps toward change. This isn't just corporate window dressing, this is real transformation. Aria returned to the podium for the big announcement. Today, I'm proud to share that the Phoenix Initiative is expanding beyond the airline industry. We've partnered with hotel chains, restaurant groups, and retail corporations to adapt our training programs for their needs. Change, like flight itself, knows no bounds. The audience erupted in applause. In the crowd, several people wiped away tears. A young flight attendant in training hugged her supervisor. This was more than just a corporate success story, it was proof that change was possible. After the presentation, Aria, Diana, and Rose found themselves back in the conference center's first-class lounge, the same one where the viral incident had occurred a year ago. They sat in the same seats, but everything else had changed. You know what's funny? Diana said, stirring her coffee. I almost called in sick that day. If I had, none of this would have happened. Sometimes our worst moments can lead to our best opportunities, Rose replied, patting her hand. The question is whether we're brave enough to learn from them. Aria looked out the window at a Phoenix Airlines plane taking off, its logo catching the sunlight. A year ago, we had a choice: let a moment of prejudice end in punishment, or turn it into an opportunity for change. I'd say we made the right choice. As if on cue, a group of flight attendants in training walked past, wearing Phoenix Initiative pins on their uniforms. They waved excitedly at Diana, who had become something of a legend in aviation circles, not for the slap, but for what came after. From viral video villain to diversity training pioneer, Diana mused, shaking her head with a smile. Life really does work in mysterious ways. No, Aria corrected gently, not mysterious, just human. We all have the capacity for both mistakes and growth. The key is creating spaces where that growth is possible. Outside, planes continue taking off and landing, carrying thousands of passengers on countless journeys. But thanks to one unexpected moment and the choices that followed, those journeys were now happening in a more understanding, more inclusive sky.